My question is to the Attorney General. Thanks, President. I refer to the more than 6,000 organisations that have joined a global internet blackout against indiscriminate government surveillance. They're joining their voices with business, civil society organisations and even senior Republican and Democratic congressmen and women to demand reforms to the dragnet surveillance conducted by the US NSA. Does this government, and the Attorney General particularly, recognise the legitimate concerns of Australians about indiscriminate surveillance, or does he honestly believe that there are no reforms necessary here in Australia?
The Attorney-General, Senator Brandis.
Thank you very much indeed, through you, Mr President, to Senator Ludlam for that question. And I note that Senator Ludlam has today published in the Guardian website an article in praise of the American trader Edward Snowden. In praise of the American trader Edward Snowden, displaying a photograph of a bus bearing the signage, "Thank you, Edward Snowden," and under the headline, "Today is the day we fight back." Now, Senator Ludlam, you celebrate and you make a hero of this man who, through his criminal dishonesty and his treachery to his country, has put lives, including Australian lives, at risk.
You're watching The World from Below, and we're joined today by Jillian York, the Director for International Freedom of Expression at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And that was a clip from Green Senator Scott Ludlam asking our Attorney General George Brandis about mass surveillance and the revelations by NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. Jillian, I wanted to talk to you about mass surveillance and the work of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. But before we get to that, tell me, what is your response to what we just saw from Attorney General George Brandis?
Well, I think that the idea of a non-US citizen calling Edward Snowden a traitor is quite rich to begin with. But at the same time, I also think that even if that were a US senator saying the same thing, I would ask him to prove it. How exactly is he a traitor? What exactly has he revealed that's put lives at risk?
Yeah, have we seen similar comments, I presume, in the United States? Maybe not specifically that, but particularly the idea that lives are at risk seems very difficult to justify as an allegation against Edward Snowden. Would you agree with that?
I would. I mean, absolutely. We heard this before with WikiLeaks. It's quite a familiar sentiment. And again, in that case, I never quite saw evidence that demonstrated that lives were put at risk. And so in this case, I think that lives are being put at risk by the types of surveillance that we're allowing, by the information sharing agreements that we may or may not have. And so I think the onus is really on the government to demonstrate to us that lives have been put at risk.
Can you give us some background information about the Electronic Frontier Foundation's work in the area of mass surveillance? The EFF has had a long history of advocacy and litigation in this field. Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So in 2005, Mark Klein, one of the early whistleblowers around NSA surveillance, came to our office and shared documents with us that demonstrated that AT&T had installed in their server room a splitter that basically, had information going toward that server room, and then out in two different ways: communications in one direction, the other direction, data going.
Genuine Prism.
Exactly, a Prism, data going straight to the NSA to be stored and perhaps analyzed. Yeah. And that's when we first began our litigation against the National Security Agency. We've also done work on surveillance in other countries as well, looking at the types of technologies sold to authoritarian governments to conduct targeted surveillance on individuals.
So that was in 2005. What was your response and your colleagues' response then to the revelations by Edward Snowden when they came out last year?
Well, I think that a lot of people maybe now might claim that they weren't surprised, but the truth is that despite the fact we had a number of people who were genuinely paranoid about surveillance, I think that everyone was shocked to have that confirmed. It reminded me of actually the reactions that I saw when people took to the streets in Egypt, that oh wow, I couldn't imagine that so many other people felt the same way that I did. It was really, that was the sentiment both in the office and amongst other members of the community last year when the revelations came out.
I just want to show you another clip, which is from an interview with Jeremy Scahill, who's the author of Dirty Wars. When he was out here in Australia, he's talking about Pine Gap, which is a facility in Central Australia used allegedly in the NSA's surveillance program. And I'll just show you that clip now.
Does Pine Gap contribute to the data that the United States needs to make these targeted killings?
Absolutely, 100%.
And how do you know?
Well, I know because I have access to top secret documents provided by various sources within U.S. government, but also because I'm working with Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras, and we have the cache of documents provided by the NSA whistleblower, Edward Snowden. I've seen many, many documents that are marked Five Eyes, which means that the United States, Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand all have access to them, that lay out exactly how the United States works with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Britain to get a base of information that can be used to track and kill individuals around the world.
So I just wanted to show that clip because I think Australians think that this is a US issue only, really. And from that, it seems clear that Australia does have some involvement in the surveillance program. But more generally, can you tell me, what are your thoughts about when surveillance is or isn't justified?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think that surveillance must be necessary. It must be demonstrated to be necessary. It has to be proportionate. It has to include due process, which the NSA's mass surveillance does not. And so I think that really what we're looking at right now is surveillance that in the US would be considered unconstitutional and is by many legal experts, but also surveillance that has a chilling effect on the way that we think about expression, organizing, association, all of that.
And it seems to be a concern of activists that the rules and what the goalposts are aren't clear, that there's a lack of transparency about when surveillance happens or what justifications are used and relied upon by governments to justify that kind of surveillance.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that our government, or really many governments, have demonstrated why this level of surveillance is necessary. We know that some type of targeted surveillance by law enforcement, when done with the proper procedures, can be helpful in certain law enforcement mechanisms. But at the same time, this kind of surveillance is absolutely disproportionate and captures the data of not just millions of Americans, but millions of people around the world whose information flows through our country.
It does seem concerning as well that the court processes put in place in America around when surveillance might or might not be justified are also shrouded in secrecy, I should say, and that even the decision-making processes of other arms of government are also affected by the secrecy that's currently protecting the NSA.
Absolutely. I mean, all of this constitutes developments that came after September 11th, 2001. And since then we've seen this. I mean, this administration, really, the Obama administration, is possibly the most secretive administration in history.
And we're going to take a short break now, but we'll be back to talk further with Jillian York about digital citizenship on The World from Below.